This is the part that maybe you came for. This is the part where we answer the question, why do we suborbital astronauts want to fly? And in fact, a couple of the people on the stage are already astronauts, so it's a little half-baked. But what I'd like to do is introduce each of them and then have them give 1 minute on that topic, and then we'll go on after that. So first, my dear friend, Colonel Pam Melroy, United States Air Force retired. She's an aerospace executive, government and industry experience across civil, commercial, and national security space. She's a retired Air Force pilot, an astronaut, a space shuttle commander, and she's held jobs in industry and government after that at Lockheed Martin, at the FAA's Office of Commercial Space Transportation, and at DARPA, and she is also with Eric on the UAG, the National Space Council Users Advisory Group. Pam Melroy. And what I'd like you to do is just stay in the chair, and you've got a microphone there.
Thank you, LA. And I realized actually about 5 minutes ago that tomorrow is the 19th anniversary of our landing in STS-92. So happy almost landing day. So my perspective on this, I think, is very much shaped by my perspective of as being a test pilot. And one of the things that is so incredibly dangerous about orbital spaceflight is that you have to put an enormous amount of energy to make it into orbit. So, and it's one shot, right? Otherwise, it's an off-nominal abort. And so things don't always go smoothly. But when you look at the aviation community, we take aircraft out and do a build-up approach. So I was a test pilot on the initial test team for the C-17. And we had a very systematic and methodical approach to going not just higher or faster, but attempting certain types of landings. You try normal landings first, then you do assault landings, then you do instrument landings, and those kinds of things. It gives you the opportunity to really have a build-up approach, and it's much safer to operate that way. Overall, I look at suborbital flight as that's one of the greatest advantages, is that you can try lower energy scenarios, shorter duration flights, and overall, of course, suborbital is fantastic because it's just a shorter duration exposure to the hazards. And so from that standpoint, we have the potential to learn so much. One of the things that you can really see when you fly the space shuttle is that we had one entry profile, one altitude, airspeed for the entire entry. And we really didn't know anything else about the atmosphere or how the vehicle would behave if you were at a slightly different altitude and airspeed combination. Nothing like an airplane. So to me, the opportunity for suborbital flight to really help us understand space flight in a much deeper way, and that we can understand our atmosphere and understand hypersonics and all those technical areas. So that's what excites me about suborbital.
Thank you, Pam. Okay, next up is our newest astronaut, at least on the stage, Beth Moses. She's the chief astronaut instructor at Virgin Galactic. You may have seen her smiling a lot in the video previously, where she was on the flight crew of Spaceship Two's test flight VF-01 in February. She's the first astronaut ever to unstrap on a suborbital flight, the first female commercial astronaut earning FAA Commercial Astronaut Wings very cool number 007. And she and her team will train Virgin Galactic's mission specialists and future astronauts for spaceflight. Beth.
Thanks, LA. Hi, everyone. Thank you for your time this afternoon. I'll add a few opening comments sort of along the lines of what Pam has indicated. And just to be really clear, I have sort of the middle role, I guess, in this whole panel. I am a professional suborbital astronaut. Recently flown. I think I'm one of the newest astronauts on the planet now. But my job is actually to train our future astronauts for their missions. So I'm testing the cabin, developing the procedures, developing the cabin hardware, developing the training program, testing the training program. Ironically, I've been several years at Virgin Galactic developing all that. I've trained one person for spaceflight, myself. I was a really bad student. No, I'm just kidding. And now I need to roll that into training our future astronauts for their flights, and also a few more mission specialists from the company, professional astronauts who will do the flight testing of the system. So that's sort of my role here, and I would like to echo exactly what the prior panel said. This is a phenomenal time in the commercial space industry. I salute every new human space endeavor that is coming online soon. You mentioned the orbital ones, Starliner, Crew Dragon, also eventually Orion. I absolutely salute Blue and the suborbital efforts, especially Blue. This is new, hard, challenging. We are all trying to make it work and making it work. Rising tide lifts all boats, and I think this is like the best time to be doing this ever. I cannot wait to train Sir Richard Branson, our founder, and all of our future astronauts for their flights because, as you've heard earlier, it is phenomenal and life-changing, and I think it will make the world a better place.
Great, thank you. Okay, next we have, and no offense to the other four of us, but the smartest guy on the stage is Dan Durda. 25 years experience researching the collisional and dynamical evolution of main belt near-Earth asteroids, volcanoids, Kuiper belt comets, and interplanetary dust. I should probably stop there, but he's also been active at the Southwest Research Institute and has, interestingly, have a foot in both the Virgin and the Blue Origin spaceflight queue, where he'll be doing some research on board both of those vehicles. So Dan, tell us about your dreams and thoughts.
Thanks, Ellie. I want to go to space and I want to fly because I've got research to do. I look at suborbital vehicles as an opportunity for me as a space scientist to get into my environment, to my field, to get some in situ experience with the phenomena that I want to research. I'm interested in the surfaces of little asteroids that we're getting ready to explore, both robotically and with human crews. I have a great interest in understanding how that granular environment operates in a microgravity situation. This is something we have no experience with from a common sense perspective as a geologist, if you will, interested in space. So for me as a space scientist, I view these vehicles akin to the way a marine geologist might view Alvin, right? The opportunity to get down to the bottom of the ocean and get in situ with their environment. This is a chance for us as space scientists to get up to our environment. So there are people like me interested in the asteroids and the astronomy side of space, but there are fluid scientists, people interested in the adaptation of the human body to space in the early stages of spaceflight. Botanists who are interested in growing plants that we're going to be needing out in space for our food stuff as we expand out there. So there's an entire range of researchers, biological sciences, physical sciences, who are just chomping at the bit to have this relatively cheap and frequent access to the space environment. So I'm raring to go because I've got work to do.
Okay, thank you, Ron. Dan. So speaking of Ron, I think Ron, Claire said that there is no typical future astronaut for Virgin Galactic, but you're not a researcher, you're a paying passenger. And his background is very interesting. He's been working on volunteer programs with students and with the general public since 1995, primarily with the Astronomical Society of the Pacific's Project Astro, and since 2008 as a NASA Solar System ambassador. He's well versed in human spaceflight travel, amateur astronomy, space science, and aviation, and is deeply committed to broadening the understanding of our planet and of our Earth's place in the universe, which is a message that I think you heard from everybody up here so far. So, Ron, tell us why.
Well, yes, following Spaceship One in 2004 and seeing Virgin Galactic making progress, I didn't really hesitate too much to buy a ticket in 2010 and have the opportunity to have that transformational and profound personal experience and seeing the Earth from space. But really, as important and more meaningful to me is sharing that vision of our beautiful Earth and having more people around the world realize that, yes, it's a fragile planet and we need to be connected and more involved. It's supremely thrilling for me to know that there'll be dozens, hundreds, thousands of people seeing the Earth from space, and I've taken the initiative to share that vision, that understanding with as many people as I can, and more specifically through talking to students in schools. So if any of you are involved with working with students and would like to hear more about this Virgin Galactic and their space travel, please contact me. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Ron. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is I'll moderate a short conversation among the panelists, and then if we have some time at the end, I'd be happy to open up the floor to questions. I think we should have some microphones available here shortly. So I want to start with you, Beth, because why we want to fly suborbitally, I think you probably have the best answer to that. So just what was it like? Tell us about the flight.
Well, it was amazing. Sure, I'll be happy to tell you about the flight. I wanted to fly because it was my job, but also, of course, I always wanted to build and fly spacecraft, as some of you that I've worked with in the past have known since you first met me. So, of course, it was an honor, and I took just a little piece of everyone, past, present, and future, that built the system and is working on the system and is looking forward to flying on the system with me in my heart. But just from a individual perspective for a moment, our flight is phenomenal. I was timelined and working hard, but a few of my test objectives were to test the customer experience and do things like establish, whether there's one window that's got a different view than another window. So I checked out the view. Let me take you through it just very quickly, beat by beat, and actually everyone here has heard bits of it, both from the blue flight profile and from the Galactic video earlier. So I'll just do a very little tiny first-hand highlights description. Release from our carrier aircraft is light and free, and even though I was timelined and rehearsed down to the fraction of a second, it felt longer than the 3 seconds that it is. So in training, we'll do a little bit of time dilation because I was really hoping the rocket motor would light, and it lit right on time, but I thought it was a little later. And then our flight profile has first 3G, so you're first when the rocket motor lights, which is smooth and stable, but exciting and catches your attention and you can hear it. You're pushed back in your seat with a little over 3G, and then the pilots turn the ship towards space, and you're compressed downward in your seat with a little over 3G. Mine was about 3.5. And then you're going purely vertical. The rocket motor burns for 60 seconds, and in the vertical, you're a little over 3G, again, compressed in your seat. Our customers will be trained for that. I know, actually, you guys have already experienced that in a centrifuge, but it's 3.5G, roughly. The rocket motor is smooth. The ride is phenomenal. I was taking ratings throughout the event, sort of along the lines of Aviate, Navigate, Communicate. I was doing loads thermal lighting to make sure that I knew exactly what you would experience and exactly what we need to refine in our cabin and our procedures, and so we're in the process of doing that now. But to sort of get to the highlight, once the rocket motor cuts off, the pilots will let you know, welcome to weightlessness, you're clear to unstrap. I did my own safety check and then cleared myself to unstrap. I was the only one in the cabin with some research payloads. And unclipped, weightlessness is amazing. Your arms don't lift up. That's a Hollywood thing, as I'm sure most of the people in this room actually know already. Many people in this room already know there's none of this. You just feel light and free and weightless, and it is pure and fun, and everybody always smiles, and even if I had been trying to keep a straight face, I'm not so sure I could have. And then you can immediately go to the window. So I tested different ways of doing that, both unstrapping and restrapping, getting timeline information. But that first view of Earth, as you saw in the video, is just remarkable. I mean, everybody, I'm sure, can remember it like it was yesterday, and I certainly can. The next bit of time dilation is at apogee. And I think some of us, Buzz, LA, Pam, anyone who's been in space, I think we'll all have to go have a drink someday, because I might put my Mach 0 up against your Mach 25 and Mach 33. Maybe not, but let me explain what I mean by that. So as it was mentioned earlier, I'm the only astronaut in history who's unstrapped on a suborbital flight and coasted to a stop on a ballistic mission. And so at apogee, I was still, our ship was still, our pilots were quiet, and we were flying a research flight, so our payloads were still by request. And that's just a moment of complete magic, hush, and stillness. And all three of us on board and all the two prior pilots that had flown on our previous flight, all five of us agree it's really, really magic and eternal, and time almost stops. And my view of Earth from apogee, just still and weightless, was something I'll never forget. Of course, I mean, I feel like I'm telling a few folks what they already know, but the black is blacker than black. The Earth is super high def, extremely bright. It's just captivating. And when you're still above it, you notice amazing things on it. I actually didn't notice the super thin atmosphere, even though that's been part of my culture my whole life. I noticed the mountains. The day I flew, I was over California. I could see halfway up the US, halfway up the US, halfway down Mexico, and all of the mountains were snow-covered, and Earth was wearing her diamonds that day. It was so, so beautiful and glistening, and that's the image that stays with me. And then you enter and land like an aircraft, and the thing that sticks with me in terms of transformation is a sense of relaxation and empathy. I'm not recycling any more than I did before I flew, but I am sort of upcycling empathy. Like, you know, when there's a guy who's a jerk in a meeting, I'm like, oh, but we're all on this pretty planet Earth wearing her diamonds. It's fine. What's your point? I mean, that's sort of the slow transformation. Of course, I just flew. I expect it'll change over time. But that was my flight. Thank you for asking.
So interestingly, I mean, you highlighted the view, and if you talk to astronauts about the overview effect, I think it's acceleration to get there and the weightlessness, but more than anything, it's the view. And so it's a question that I have, and I don't think you did either, Pam, think about, because as a professional, you're so worried about not screwing up that you don't really think about the following question. But I'd like to ask Ron, how do you think this is going to change your life?
It's hard to say. Obviously, I think, well, for sure, I think that anyone that takes the flight will be transformed and profoundly transformed in the way they see things and look at things. I think I'll have a deeper understanding of the planet and of our place in the universe. At first, I thought, I'll just look at the Earth, and then someone else said, no, you should, be looking out at the sky too. So I hope to see stars and have a sense of the universe and the galaxy and everything around it. And the opportunity after that to share that experience, I think, is going to be, really something that's, unsurpassable. And to have people from all over the world doing it, I think it's going to change more for the world than just for me. It's people be looking at the planet in a very, very different way.
So I want to go a little bit from the aspirational and esoteric to, maybe a little bit more practical, and ask both Pam and Dan. But you mentioned the build-up approach, and I think there's not only from the personal experience, but from the research side, from the payload side, you can imagine how suborbital payload flights might lead experimenters to be, to tweak the bugs and that sort of thing. So any comments on that, Pam?
Yeah, exactly. I talked about the energy involved and the safety and how great that is that you can have a build-up approach. But obviously, it's also a lot less expensive. And I think you'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about how you don't actually have to have days of microgravity on your first experiment. And so one of the things that I think is a huge problem across the industry is the cost of space qualifying hardware. And so for me, I see the opportunity that you can test hardware, you can potentially space qualify it or space qualify bits and pieces of it at a tremendously lower cost, but more importantly, the fact that you can then go back and try something again very quickly, which right now in orbital flight, there's a long queue and a process that you have to go through. So to me, I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, I think I'll echo that. I think that iterative approach to being able to do you're doing experiments, right? Things don't always work, and you want to have that ability, that flexibility to learn from what works and what doesn't, and be able to apply those and make your experiment better and learn new phenomena. Let's face it, if we knew what the answer was going to be, we wouldn't have to fly the experiment in the first place. So one can expect to be surprised, and one wants to be surprised. Sometimes those surprises come in the form of things that didn't quite work the way you wanted them to. And so I think having this ability to rapidly turn your experiment around, maybe in the case of just a couple of days, to fly it again and get a second chance at it is very important. So I think with that comes the whole issue of what to expect when you're flying and training and getting ready for it. You mentioned about unstrapping. I'll tell you, I've done enough zero-G already in flying the parabolic aircraft flights with my experiments to know that I hate to say it, but I've had that experience, and I know that I'm only going to have a small shot at it with this suborbital experience, and I plan to stay strapped in, thank you very much, because I've got work to do, and I don't want to waste time potentially getting into a situation that I can't get myself back into safely. So I plan to stay strapped in and keep it safe for everybody else too at the same time.
Interesting. So you mentioned that you've got a lot of zero-G time. You've also have some high-performance jet time, and I'm curious, and maybe Beth, you can comment on this too. Part of the appeal of these suborbital flights is you don't have to do a whole, weeks or months worth of training. It's a matter of days. But from your anticipation, Dan, and maybe your experience, Beth, what elements do you think are most important in that training?
Go ahead. You take it first.
Well, so the goal of the Virgin Galactic training, which is 3 days before your space flight, give or take depending on weather, is to make sure that everyone arrives in space ready to savor their space flight however they define. This is personalized, bespoke to our Virgin service. So if you're wanting to stay in your seat and tend to a payload, we'll work through that. If you're wanting to get out of your seat and enjoy the view, or tumble in weightlessness, or if you're most looking forward to the rocket ride, whatever it is, we will sort that out in training. The most important parts of the training are essentially getting the spacecraft and the systems out of your experience base so that you can just forget about them and rely on them to do their job while you enjoy the space flight. So it's things like familiarity with your suit, your comm system, your seat, your harness, the comm with pilots in both Spaceship and White Knight, dress rehearsal, final fit checks. Where is your family going to be? How do you, suit up and depart and board? I'll strap you in, but what happened just before that? So it's really just familiarity with all of that. Perhaps unlike historical legacy government systems where there was a task to be done, actually, Galactic and the spacecraft have to do all the tasks on behalf of the customers, other than, for example, the research that you bring with you. So it is a shift from non-commercial programs over to the onus being on Virgin Galactic, and the training being really so that you can savor your space flight and do what it is you choose to do on your space flight as opposed to a task.
I'll just very quickly, I'll just echo what Beth just said, is the savoring that experience and getting the most out of that experience, I think, comes if you bring to the table already having had a little zero-G time or having already experienced what those Gs are going to feel like. That's going to, I think, go a long way to not being overwhelmed by everything hitting you at once and being able to really savor that experience. The beauty of these vehicles is that you don't need to have that training ahead of time, but I'll tell you, I think it's going to sure help if you have that option. I'd highly advise you to go out there and get a little bit of that training, just so that when you come time for the real thing and it's time to actually go, you get to really savor it. So I just echo that.
Very good. So I can say after my 7-month mission, I came back and thought that it went too fast. And I'm sure that's true of every space flight, including suborbitals and including this panel. So I regret that our time is up. I want you to help me thank all the panelists, both on the stage and sitting in the front row here. Thanks to everybody.